The concept of mass surveillance isn't a relatively new subject. Mass surveillance creates a prison in our mind that is a powerful and effective means of breeding conformity, obedience, and submission. When we allow a society to exist in which we are subject to constant surveillance, we have defeated the point of being human.
Wait a second. There must be some reason as to why so many governments around the world still choose to employ mass surveillance techniques. After all, it is a costly and time-consuming process. So what are the potential upsides to mass surveillance? To start, there is debate as to whether mass surveillance is actually effective or not. In 2013, National Security Agency Director Keith Alexander claimed in a House committee meeting that mass surveillance was used to foil more than 50 terror plots. However, critics say otherwise. We here at the Armchair Specialists are not qualified enough to say who is right and who is wrong. But with all the information gathered from mass surveillance, it is hard to believe that none of it can be of use. Some say that in this increasingly unstable world, there are an infinite number of ways to transmit information, and that it is hard to target our surveillance in the right areas. Sure, we know what we're looking for, but just where do we look? One place where mass surveillance has been implemented on a large scale is in the province of Xinjiang in western China. There are a lot of politics involved in this, but for the purpose of this video, we will try to stay out of all that. Basically, in July of 2009, deadly riots broke out in Xinjiang where 200 people were killed, prompting the Chinese government to use a multi-pronged approach to tighten security in the area. Firstly, they implemented convenient police stations designed to keep an eye out on potential threats. Some may fear this police presence, but the government argues that having increased police presence makes it easier for them to respond to potential attacks and would help to deter crime. Secondly, the government made use of technology, implementing surveillance cameras all over the state, particularly around street corners, gas stations, and other high-traffic areas. These cameras are no ordinary security cameras either. They have facial recognition software and are connected to government databases, allowing them to match everyone's face to the picture on their identity cards that are registered in the government's database. Simply put, the government is able to attach a name tag to every person on the street. And this may sound creepy, but according to the government, regular citizens have nothing to hide. The primary purpose of these cameras is to help identify people on the run, or people on the government's watch list. There are also cameras that can identify car license plates. If cameras are set up across the city, the government can use cameras to track a person's movements. Imagine if my car was stolen one day. This technology would allow the government to track down the location of my car based on where it was last seen on the street. Statistics show that riots and violent protests have fallen since, showing the effectiveness of the Chinese government's measures. However, critics argue that this is largely due to fear, as citizens no longer dare to dissent or rebel against the government. Many arguments made by proponents of mass surveillance often use the nothing to hide argument, where if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. And I have to admit that there is a point to this argument, as most of us are law-abiding citizens who truly have nothing to hide. Others argue that mass surveillance do indeed pose a threat to the people, and find it unnerving that someone could be watching their every step. Perhaps the least controversial stance on this issue is one similar to the old adage, fire is a good servant but a bad master. Mass surveillance can be used effectively, with no threat to regular people, provided that it is placed in the right hands. However, it can also be used to infringe upon one's privacy if placed in the wrong ones. The whole crux of this issue is that it is impossible to have security and privacy at the same time. To achieve one, you must give up a bit of the other. We made this video in response to our earlier video, which had a pretty strong stance on mass surveillance. We want everyone to know that it is important that everyone does their due diligence and does their research when exploring moral arguments like this. What do you think about mass surveillance now? Let us know on our social media pages.